Welcome, brave souls, to Dr. Sinister's Tales of Terror. Tonight we venture into the chilling shadows of isolation. A woman hears strange noises under her bed. A new homeowner discovers something horrifying in her backyard well. And a man in a remote home comes face to face with a nightmare in his basement. Each story will leave you breathless and questioning what lurks in the darkness. If you enjoy spine-tingling tales, kindly hit the like button and subscribe to Dr. Sinister's Tales of Terror. Let us guide you into the heart of fear. The stories await. Shall we begin? The wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the windows of the solitary house, perched on the edge of a frozen wilderness. Inside, David sat by the fire, its orange glow casting flickering shadows that danced on the wooden walls. The storm outside had intensified, snow falling in furious sheets that rendered the world beyond his windows a swirling, white void. He sipped his coffee, the mug warming his hands, as he settled into his favorite armchair. Then, without warning, the house was plunged into darkness. The power went out. The firelight now seemed feeble against the encroaching blackness, and the familiar hum of the heater fell silent. David cursed under his breath. He set the mug on a nearby table and tried to find his flashlight, but couldn't locate it in the dark. The breaker box was in the basement, a place David avoided unless necessary. It wasn't the spiders or the chill that unnerved him, but the oppressive stillness, the way the shadows seemed thicker there, more deliberate. Still, he had no choice. Pulling on his boots, he descended the creaking stairs. The basement smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic. As he reached the bottom, he found his way toward the breaker box. Its old metal face was streaked with rust, the switches stiff from years of disuse. He flipped them back and forth, but the house remained cloaked in darkness. Frustrated, he muttered, "Just great," and turned to head back upstairs. That was when he saw them, a pair of eyes, gleaming and unblinking, staring at him from the far corner of the basement. His breath hitched. The eyes were set low, almost at floor level, their gaze fixed and unnervingly calm. "Who's there?" David's voice echoed in the confined space, trembling despite his effort to sound firm. There was no response, only the continued stare. The eyes blinked once, and David realized with growing horror that they were moving closer. His heart pounded as he backed toward the stairs, tripping over something on the floor. He could hear it now, a faint shuffling, like something dragging itself across the floor. As the thing approached, its outline came into view. It was humanoid, but its movements were jerky and unnatural, as though its limbs were being manipulated by unseen strings. The pale skin of its face stretched too tightly over its skull, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque, silent scream. David bolted up the stairs, his boots slamming against the wood as he fought against the rising tide of panic. He could hear it behind him, the sound of uneven, scrambling movements growing louder. He reached the door and slammed it shut, throwing his weight against it as he fumbled for the lock. The house was eerily silent again, save for his ragged breathing. Then the scratching began, slow, deliberate, and just on the other side of the door. David stumbled backward, looking for something nearby he could use as a weapon. The sound ceased, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. He turned and ran to the living room, grabbing his cell phone from the table. No signal. The storm had severed his connection to the outside world. David's mind raced as he considered his options. He grabbed the fireplace poker and positioned himself near the front door. The hours stretched on, each creak of the house and howl of the wind setting his nerves further on edge. He thought he might have imagined it, that perhaps his isolation had finally taken its toll. But then he saw it. The eyes were in the window now, staring at him from just beyond the frost-rimmed glass. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure pressed a hand to the window, leaving a smudged, wet imprint on the glass. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. In a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, David yanked open the door and ran into the storm. The freezing wind lashed at his face, and the snow quickly soaked through his clothes. He ran blindly, his only thought to escape the nightmare that had invaded his home. Behind him, he could hear the thing following, its movements audible, even over the roar of the storm. Finally, he saw the lights of his nearest neighbor's house through the swirling snow. He pounded on the door until it opened, the startled man inside pulling him to safety. Between gasps for air, David recounted his ordeal. The neighbor, though skeptical, called the police. When the officers arrived at David's house, they found the front door standing open, snow drifting in across the threshold. The basement door was ajar, but the room below was empty. There were no footprints in the snow outside the window, no sign of any intruder. The only clue was a single, wet handprint smeared across the glass. David never returned to the house. The memory of those eyes, and the thing that had stared at him from the darkness, haunted his every waking moment. In the dim, suffocating quiet of her modest home, Sally often found solace in solitude. The world beyond her doors was a world she preferred to avoid, and her evenings were spent reading by the dim glow of a single lamp. Her house, though small, was orderly, each room an expression of her meticulous nature. Yet there lingered an unease, a shadow that crept through her thoughts and stirred in the silence. It began subtly, as such things often do. She would misplace objects, only to find them in strange and improbable places. The front door, which she always locked with precision, would sometimes be found ajar. The floorboards, prone to creaking in the night, seemed to groan under the weight of an unseen presence. Sally dismissed these as figments of an overactive mind, her rationality shielding her from darker suppositions. One evening, as the wind keened against the windows, Sally retired early. The day had been long, her nerves frayed by trivial annoyances. She prepared her bed with care, smoothing the sheets, as though taming her restless thoughts. The house was still, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on her bedside table. As she slipped under the covers, a peculiar sensation crept over her, a heaviness, as though the air itself pressed upon her chest. She dismissed it, turning to extinguish the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, and she lay there, her breath slow and deliberate, her ears attuned to the faintest sound. A noise disturbed her reverie, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling. It emanated from somewhere beneath her bed. Sally froze, her pulse quickening as icy dread gripped her. For a moment she lay motionless, her mind warring with itself. Surely it was nothing, perhaps a rodent or the creak of old timber. But the sound came again, unmistakable in its deliberate nature. Summoning her courage, Sally reached for the lamp. The faint glow illuminated the room, casting long, sinister shadows that danced upon the walls. She peered over the edge of the bed, her heart hammering in her chest. The rustling ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to roar in her ears. Her trembling hand reached for the floor, her fingertips brushing the cold wood. She dared not look beneath the bed. her fear building to a crescendo. Then, as though compelled by some unseen force, she lowered herself further. The space beneath the bed was a void, a darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely. She squinted, her eyes adjusting to the gloom, and then she saw it, a face, pale and gaunt, staring back at her with eyes that burned with an unnatural light. The man lay motionless, his body contorted in a way that defied reason. His lips parted in a grotesque grin, revealing yellowed teeth that gleamed in the dim light. For a moment, neither moved, their gazes locked in a macabre tableau. Sally screamed, a piercing wail that shattered the stillness. She scrambled back, her limbs flailing as she tried to distance herself from the horror beneath her bed. The man moved then, his movements jerky and inhuman. He crawled out, his limbs dragging against the floor with a sound that scraped at her sanity. She fled, her bare feet slipping on the wooden floor as she bolted from the room. The house seemed to close in around her, its once familiar halls now a labyrinth of terror. She reached the front door, her fingers fumbling with the lock as she sobbed uncontrollably. Behind her, the sound of dragging footsteps grew louder, closer. Finally, the door yielded, and Sally burst into the night. She ran down the street, her breath a frantic rhythm in the cold air, until she found refuge beneath a street lamp. There she collapsed, trembling, her eyes fixed on the darkened silhouette of her house. It was there that she saw him again. From the upstairs window, the pale, grinning face stared down at her, motionless yet unnervingly present. The sight froze her blood, and she stumbled backward, her scream catching in her throat. A passing car stopped, and the driver, concerned, offered to take her to safety. She barely managed to explain as he drove her to the nearest police station. When the authorities arrived at the house, they searched every room, every corner. The house was empty. The bed was undisturbed, the doors still locked. Yet on the windowsill of her bedroom, they found damp handprints, as though someone had been watching from within. Sally never returned. The house remained abandoned, its dark windows reflecting only the curious stares of passers-by. The neighbors spoke of her tale in hushed tones, a warning of things unseen that lurked in quiet places. Sally's life, though forever shadowed by that night, became a testament to her survival, a story she could barely bring herself to recount, save for the lingering memory of the face in the window, a specter that haunted her every dream. On the outskirts of a quaint, forgotten town, where the fog clung to the earth like a shroud, a woman named Eleanor purchased a house, an aged, creaking relic with a backyard well that seemed to groan under the weight of its years. The well's lid, a heavy slab of rusted iron, lay over its gaping mouth, as though barring some ancient secret. The real estate agent had assured her it was merely an ornamental relic, abandoned and sealed for decades. But Eleanor, a creature of practicality and solitude, felt a peculiar unease every time her gaze fell upon it. The nights in her new home were quiet, save for the occasional whisper of wind rattling the window panes. It was on one such night, as Eleanor sat immersed in a novel, that she first heard it, a faint, intermittent tapping from the backyard. The sound was too deliberate to be dismissed as mere branches brushing against the house. Her pulse quickened, but after a cautious inspection through the back door's frosted glass, she saw only shadows pooling beneath the skeletal branches of the trees. Resolving to dismiss it as the workings of her imagination, she returned to her book. Yet, the tapping recurred. Nights passed, and with them came strange noises, a faint scraping, an uneven shuffle, and once a sound akin to muffled sobbing. Each time, Eleanor braved the chill to investigate, armed with nothing but her flashlight and an uneasy resolve. She found nothing amiss, save for her growing sense of dread. The well remained still, its lid unmoved, and the backyard lay cloaked in an eerie stillness that seemed to mock her. One fateful evening, a storm rolled in, its rain drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof. Eleanor, wrapped in a blanket, tried to drown her unease in the warmth of a cup of tea. But then it came again, a sharp, resonant clang, followed by a dragging sound that raised the hairs on her arms. Gripping her flashlight, she stepped out into the storm. The wind howled around her, and the rain stung her skin, but her focus was fixed on the well. To her horror, the iron lid was removed, revealing a sliver of impenetrable darkness. Her breath caught. Gathering what courage she could muster, Eleanor peered into the abyss. Nothing stirred within, but the air around her seemed to thrum with a malign energy. She backed away, her unease blossoming into fear. She ran back across the yard to her back door, locked the door behind her, and fled upstairs to the sanctuary of her bedroom, her heart pounding like a drum. But as she reached the threshold of her room, she froze. There, imprinted in muddy, irregular smears, were footprints leading to her bed. They were large, misshapen, and dripping wet. A chill crawled up her spine. The air was damp and rank, carrying with it a foulness that turned her stomach. She clutched the banister, her mind spinning. When she turned to flee, she collided with something solid and unyielding. A man, if such a creature could be called that, loomed before her. His grotesque form was clad in tattered, sodden rags, his skin pallid and bloated as though waterlogged. His face was a nightmare, with hollow eyes that burned with a malignant hunger, and a grin that split his face like a wound. His hand, cold and clammy, shot out to grasp her arm. Eleanor screamed, her voice a raw, primal sound that reverberated through the house. She thrashed and clawed, her survival instinct overriding her terror. By some miracle, she managed to wrench herself free, her shoulder burning with the strain. She stumbled down the stairs, her feet barely skimming the ground, and burst into the rain-soaked night. The world blurred as she ran, her only thought to reach the nearest neighbor. Pounding on their door, she gasped out her story. The neighbors, alarmed, called the police. When the officers arrived, they found the house eerily silent. Inside, the footprints remained, grotesque and damning, leading from the well to Eleanor's room. But when they descended into the well to search, they found nothing but slick, moss-covered stones and stagnant water. The creature had vanished, leaving no trace, save for the terror etched into Eleanor's soul. From that night on, the house stood empty once more, its shadowed windows gazing blindly at the well. Locals whispered of curses and restless spirits, but Eleanor spoke of it no more. She left the town, her story, an unsettling memory she would carry forever, a reminder of the malevolence that had once clawed its way from the depths.